Shabbat Shalom, friends. I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn, New York, from my cousin's living room. I'd love to say those are all my books behind me, but they're not. They're her husband's. He's Rabbi Eliezer Sandler. And it feels really strange not to have my kahal, my community, in front of me. So this may be very quick, and I may do a lot of ums, but I'm doing the best I can, as we all are in this very challenging time. I'm very grateful to be able to do this and to speak to you about Parshat Vayikra, which is coming up this coming Shabbat. I don't know when you're watching this. Vayikra is the holiness code. Vayikra comes in the center of the Torah. And we've already read the first two books of the Torah, Breshit and Shemot, Genesis and Exodus, and after Vayikra, Leviticus, we're going to go into Bamidbar and Dvarim, which is Numbers and Deuteronomy. But here we are at the very first Parsha in the middle of the Torah, and the Torah puts the holiness code in the middle. We just read last week Pekudei, where they built the Mishkan, the tent of the meeting, and now Vayikra begins with the words, I got one of those books here, Vayikra el Moshe, Vayedaber Adonai elav, me'ohel moed lemor. And he called to Moses, and God spoke to him from the tent of the meeting, saying, if you look at the Hebrew, I don't know if you can see it here, but the word Vayikra, the aleph is a small aleph. It's interesting that it's written that way in the Torah, the very small aleph. Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet. And Rashi says that when the Torah makes a difference in a letter, it's to call our attention to the word. What does the word Vayikra mean? And he called. God calls to Moses. We already read about that in the burning bush in the earlier book of the Torah. God called to him lovingly, Moshe, Moshe. And Moses responded. Here again, God is calling to Moses lovingly. But in the next book, we will read in Numbers about the prophet Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet, who went to curse the Jewish people. And God put words in his mouth and put a talking donkey in his way, an angel in his way with a sword. Bilam was not being spoken to or called lovingly by God. And so there is no aleph. The word is Vayikar, and he called. When God gave the Torah to the Jewish people and Moses wrote it down, the little aleph would have been Moses' way of looking at himself, so the sages say. Why would Moses think of himself as being small? We read that Moses was a humble man. And I like that idea of humility, but I also like the idea that he was a great man. I like the idea that we all can find this greatness inside ourselves. I mentioned that I came to the East Coast on March 1st. I came for a faith leaders retreat. It was in Massachusetts, and I met many different faith leaders from different faiths besides Judaism. It was taught by Dr. Maria Sirois, my positive psychology teacher of 10 years, and also Reverend Mary Lee Clark. She taught us about resilience, and she taught us about how to face challenges in hard times, how to lead our congregation in hard times. And this was just before the escalation of the coronavirus. On my way back from Massachusetts on the train, I got a call from Pamela Schiffer, who is a colleague of mine, a cantor, and she asked me to write an article for the Cantors Assembly. And I had no idea what I was going to write on, and I didn't even have a sense of the perspective of what was happening. And yet, Vayikra gave me that perspective. As I journeyed and then took a subway, and then the subway train, something happened, and I had to get off and take a lift. I ended up in a lift with a driver who was from Bangladesh and had never heard of the Beatles. Immediately when he said he was from Bangladesh, I heard George Harrison's song in my head. It started me thinking, and I was able to write an article which was submitted this morning for the Cantors Assembly. Being here in Brooklyn, seeing Purim on March 11th, we were in shul, there were people all in the streets, gave me a perspective of joy, music, hearing the trope, knowing that the Megillah that I heard was read in under an hour, and the Megillah that my cousin's neighborhood was done in under 15 minutes, gave me such a perspective on how each of us can approach our practice, our ritual. And in Vayikra, it talks about each of us bringing our sacrifices to the temple. If you can't afford a big sacrifice, then you bring a handful of flour. But never to bring too much, to limit what you bring so that you're not overblowing your ego or anything like that. The day after Purim, the numbers of cases of the coronavirus escalated, and we chose to shelter at home. We were told then by Governor Cuomo that we were to keep a 6-foot distance if we did go out amongst people. And my cousin and I started walking to keep our cardiovascular system going and to keep healthy, and just to get a different perspective than the four walls of the house. We walked through the streets of Brooklyn where there was still lots of traffic and noise and honking, and shops were still open and people were buying things and hoarding things actually off the shelves. There was no toilet paper left. In fact, I was in Target at one point and I went to get toilet paper off the shelf, and I called my cousin to see if she wanted it, and by the time I turned around, it was gone. When we got to this wonderful place, half an hour walk from her house, it was called the Salt Marshes. I thought, I had been to Brooklyn so many times and I didn't even know it was there. Beautiful sunshine, beautiful water, it was quiet. We saw swans diving for food. We saw geese flying against the sky. We saw ospreys making their nest. As we walked back, we saw daffodils blooming and crocuses coming up from the ground. And it gave us such a different perspective from what we saw on the computer, on the internet, of the cases growing, or what we saw on the news. And then we started to hear that it was happening all around us, that people we knew were getting this virus. And there was a sense of fear and foreboding. And yet, as Maria taught me in this Faith Leaders Conference, one of the things that we can do is to have this perspective. And one of the things that gives us perspective is learning from history. We learn from history every time we read the Torah. Just like the Bangladeshi driver didn't know the history of his own country, didn't know the Beatles, when I told him the history behind the song Bangladesh. So when we look at the Torah and we look in Vayikra and we see the times there when they talk about washing and diseases and being careful and taking care of your community and sacrifices, we're reaching back in history to teach us how to behave towards each other, to restrict sometimes so that we're not taking all the toilet paper off the shelf, so that we're leaving for someone else, so that if we see someone stealing a package, we say, hey, stealing a package off someone's doorstep, hey, leave that there. Looking out for each other, being the Kihila Kadosha, the holy community that we are. In these days when we're stuck inside the four walls, it's good to remember who we are, to look at this Torah, not even as far back as the Torah, to look at who we came from, who we are by blood, or even by choice. Who were our ancestors? What courage did they have? If they didn't have that courage, we wouldn't be here today, my friends. So draw on that courage and draw on that holiness and that sense that every moment has a piece of beauty in it and a piece of joy in it, and that even when we make our sacrifices by having to sit behind a computer to communicate, that when we walk through the streets of Brooklyn right now, and wherever you may be in California or wherever you're watching this, there are people now sitting outside and waving Good Shabbos. There are people that you can wave to that you probably wouldn't have waved to before. You may have just walked by them. There are opportunities, just as there was opportunity in the Mishkan. Vayikra el Moshe. God called to Moses, and God is calling to us right now to look at his holiness code and to look at science, to protect each other, to be there for each other, to thrive, because even with all the plagues and all the challenges, we still came out triumphant. I wish you Shabbat Shalom. I hope that I get home to California to wish it to you from California, although probably not with as many books. And I'm very happy to say that I'm very prepared, and I think I have toilet paper in when I get home. So be well, be healthy, take care of each other. Shabbat Shalom.